of people in this country when they see the devastating impact on the middle class. So having said that, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill, and with that I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentleman from California. Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to congratulate my distinguished Rules Committee colleague for his very thoughtful, warm, and loving mischaracterization of where we stand on this issue. This is not about Donald Trump. This is not about Donald Trump at all. I mean, we continue to hear the two words Donald Trump invoked on the tax debate. What this is about, Mr. Speaker, is that 253,484 women-owned small businesses in this country who are seeking to ensure that they can continue to have the ability to hire people and grow their businesses. This is about the potential of losing 710,000 jobs based on the Ernst & Young report that has come forward. This is about ensuring that we turn the corner on our economy. Now, Mr. Speaker, when I came here in 1981, one of the first bills that I introduced was a bill calling for a flat rate tax. People talked about that all the time. I mean, the standard joke out there was, well, the simple tax form was, how much did you earn last year? The second line was, send it to Washington. I mean, those are the kinds of things that people have said might be in the direction of tax reform, but what we need to do is we need to recognize that everyone has talked about the problem of taxes. Famously, the former chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Long, would say, don't tax you, don't tax me, tax the guy behind the tree. We all know, Democrats and Republicans alike, that there is a desire to make this happen. There's always talk from Democrats and Republicans. Again, President Obama has said we need to bring about tax reform. President Obama has said we need to reduce the top corporate rate from that 35% level. I congratulate him for acknowledging that we have the highest corporate tax rate of any nation on the face of the earth, now that Japan has lowered theirs, Mr. Speaker. And so everybody talks about it, but the question is, how do we actually get it done? Now, my friend said that if we really wanted to do it, we could have done it. Well, there are specifics in this measure. There are specifics. We have 5 of them included among them, ensuring that we repeal the alternative minimum tax, and everyone acknowledges how terrible that is. Ensuring that we have 2 rates of not more than 10 and 25%, and yes, doing what President Obama has said we need to do, and that is reducing the top corporate rate. This calls for 35 to not more than 25%. And then also dealing with a global aspect. So this has specifics in it, and what it has, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day is, let's get the job done. Action, action, action. We can continue to hear all kinds of talk, press release, I mean, all this sort of stuff, talk about what this is. This is about actually doing what Democrats and Republicans say needs to be done. And so I think that working with our colleagues in the Senate, we ensure, by the way, under this structure, that no Democrat is denied the opportunity to offer amendments. You know, my friend said that we don't have this great bipartisanship. Well, we're pursuing a bipartisan goal of comprehensive tax reform and the structure to make that happen. But as this process begins, we will have clearly amendments in both the House and the Senate offered by any member who wants to participate in this process, you know, at the committee level as it goes through. We have many thoughtful, I see we have the ranking Democratic member of the Ways and Means Committee, my very dear friend Mr. Levin here on the floor. I'm sure that as we proceed with tax reform under this structure that Mr. Levin will be offering many thoughtful amendments to this measure. His right is guaranteed under these expedited procedures. So what we're arguing, Mr. Speaker, is that we need to make sure that rather than simply talking, we get things done. And I think we've got a chance to do that now. So, Mr. Speaker, I urge my colleagues to support this measure. We're going to go into debate now with our friends on the Ways and Means Committee, and from there we will have a vote on the substitute, which I'm happy to say that we made an order that will be offered by the distinguished ranking minority member of the Committee on Rules, and then we will proceed with a vote on this measure So I urge my colleagues to support action, action, action over talk, talk, talk when it comes to the imperative of growing our economy and reforming taxes. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Michigan is recognized for 1 hour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 6169, the pathway to job creation through a simpler, fairer tax code. Yesterday, House Republicans, joined by 19 House Democrats, voted to extend current tax policies through the end of next year. That was an important, responsible step to provide Congress the time to enact and pass comprehensive tax reform without risking further damage to a fragile economy. The failure to stop the tax hike that's looming at the end of the year could push us over a jobs cliff. I know many Democrats want to raise taxes, but an independent study by Ernst & Young shows the Democrat tax hike would eliminate over 700,000 jobs. We can't afford to lose more jobs in the United States, and that is why we voted to extend current tax policy. Instead of raising taxes on small businesses and making it harder to create jobs, as the Democrat plan did, Republicans are focused on creating jobs, reforming the tax code to make it simpler and fairer for all Americans, and strengthening our economy. The bill before us today provides a pathway to that goal. This bill forces Congress to do its job, something I think all Americans will support. It provides a specific timeline for the House and Senate to act next year on comprehensive tax reform. It also ensures an open process. A bill is introduced, and then the appropriate committees may amend it. Democrats and Republicans alike will have an opportunity to debate and offer changes. And this bill tells the American people exactly where we want the debate to start. We say that tax reform should eliminate special interest loopholes to reduce rates for families and employers, reducing the current 6 tax brackets down to just 2, 10% and 25%. Help America be competitive in the global economy by setting a corporate rate of 25% and updating a 50-year-old international tax code to a modern and more competitive territorial system, and get rid of the alternative minimum tax. It's currently looming over 31 million middle-class families. We also don't think we should ask taxpayers to bail out Washington's wasteful spending. Tax reform should not result in the federal government taking more out of the economy and more out of taxpayer pockets than the tax system historically has. Tax reform is not about making the government bigger. It's about creating jobs. That's why this bill says federal tax revenues should remain within historic norms of 18 to 19% of gross domestic product. Independent economists have noted when paired with appropriate government spending cuts, comprehensive tax reform that includes these policies could lead to the creation of 1 million American jobs in the first year alone. Compare that to the Democrat plan offered yesterday, a tax hike that would eliminate over 700,000 American jobs. The choice could not be clearer. Do we want and does America need Democrat tax hikes that destroy jobs, or do we want and does America need Republican-backed tax reform that creates a simpler, fairer code and 1 million jobs in the first year alone? Today, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have one more opportunity to stand with families and job creators by joining House Republicans to demonstrate their commitment to passing and enacting comprehensive tax reform next year. We can and should work together to revive our economy and get the unemployed back to work. And, Mr. Speaker, I urge all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to vote in favor of this legislation and in doing so take an important step to creating a simpler, fairer tax code and more jobs for American families, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin, is recognized.
I yield
for 1 hour.
myself such time as I shall consume. Pass unanimous consent to vote.
Without objection.
Move it back just a bit. Yesterday, Republicans voted to put tax cuts for millionaires as their priority over giving 114 million middle-class Americans certainty. Today, they are doubling down on that agenda. The so-called principles laid out in this bill would rig tax reform to shift the burden of taxes further onto the middle class and ship jobs overseas. The Joint Economic Committee analysis, it's described here, found that the average millionaire would get another $331,000 in tax cuts, while middle-class families making less than $200,000 would see their taxes go up by an average of $4,500. For millionaires, a tax break, $331,000. For middle-class families, taxing more at $4,500. That's the Joint Economic Committee analysis. And why? Because the only way to finance these massive tax cuts for the highest earners is to eliminate or significantly curtail provisions that support the middle class. These are not loopholes. These are policies that in many cases help make the middle class of this country. 70% of the benefit of the mortgage interest deduction, for example, goes to those who make less than $200,000. 82% of the benefit of the exclusion for employer-provided health insurance goes to those making less than $200,000, and likewise the provisions relating, for example, to education. Republicans like to say they will eliminate loopholes, and we just heard that language, and special interest provisions to pay for lower rates. But the provisions I mentioned are not loopholes. They are policies that help to build the middle class of America. They are basically, as I said, middle-class provisions, and now they're on the chopping block under this Republican plan. There's maybe just one among other ways to describe it. H.R. 6169 is Grover Norquist on steroids. We need tax reform, but not as a tactic to sock it to the middle class and help the very wealthy. Yet that's exactly what Republicans in Congress want to do. And now we've received recently an analysis of the plan of Governor Romney. It's also a plan highly offensive to the middle class. A report from the Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center yesterday made no bones about what it would do to the middle class. They wrote that it is not mathematically possible to write a plan like the one drafted by Governor Romney, in quotes, that does not result in a net tax cut for high-income taxpayers and a net tax increase for lower and or middle-income taxpayers, end of quotes. The House Republican plan to lower the corporate rate to 25% would require eliminating every provision that encourages American manufacturing, the R&D credit, accelerated depreciation, the manufacturing deduction, every one of those. And the Joint Committee on Taxation has found that even if you eliminated everything, you could only lower the rate to 28% on a revenue-neutral basis. We need tax reform, indeed we do, but not a tax rewrite that discourages companies from making it in America and that would move us to a territorial system that taxes no businesses overseas in terms of their income and helps to ship jobs overseas. Well, surely a plan this radical, that's really what it is, a radical Republican proposal, should be subject to the full scrutiny of regular order and full debate. But not under this bill. Under this bill, the pathway Republicans are setting up is really a railroad to shift the tax burden onto the middle class and shipping jobs overseas. It creates a tax czar, and I'm opposed to any of us being a tax czar, Republican or Democrat, Mr. Camp, myself, or anybody else. It would be a tax czar who creates the plan and then certifies their plan that it achieves their goals. It would allow him or her to add any other proposal to this high-speed train through Congress. Social Security privatization, that could become part of not this fast track, but this railroad. Repeal of health reform or anything else. We should reject that path and adopt the Slaughter substitute, which would articulate principles for tax reform that would strengthen the middle class, create jobs in the U.S., and reduce the deficit. You know, we continue to hear about the small businesses. 97% would receive the full tax benefit under what was rejected yesterday and that we put forth. And in terms of this report about 700,000 jobs, every fact checker has said it's essentially bogus. And I think that's how bankrupt the majority is coming forth. I'd like them to answer the joint economic analysis. I'd like them to answer the study that came out from 3 people about Governor Romney's proposal. Oh, one of the spokespersons said, oh, it's a liberal think tank that analyzed it that way. Oh, no. 2 of the 3 authors served in Republican administrations. It's not a partisan analysis. It's a bipartisan analysis. And it shows essentially what's being proposed here and what Governor Romney is proposing is socket to middle-class America in order to help the very, very wealthiest. That isn't the America that we want. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
Thank you. I yield myself 15 seconds. I would just say to my friend that I don't know whose plan that is. Somebody made that up because that's not our plan. a plan that increased middle-class tax hikes isn't something that middle-class taxes isn't something that I could agree with. What we envision is an open process that Republicans and Democrats could offer amendments on, but the point is this: comprehensive tax reform that creates jobs and gets the economy moving and gets us back on track can be accomplished. So with that, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Trade Subcommittee, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Brady.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as Vice Chairman of the Joint Economic Committee, I would point out that that was a partisan report, very partisan report, on the Republican tax proposal, developed developed by the Ways and Means Committee and included in the Republican budget. But let me ask you this, because here's the real question. As hardworking Americans, when you open the mailbox and see a letter from the IRS, what do you think? How frightened are you? If you're a small business owner, you get a call from the IRS saying, you know, it's time to audit you. You know, how fearful are you? Truth of the matter is, Americans are frightened of their own tax law, of their own tax code. They know it's unfair. They know it's too complicated. They know if they make a mistake, who knows how damaging it would be for them. We now have one full of special loopholes, so complicated, the best tax lawyers in America, including the IRS, don't quite understand it. And now we've gone from first to worst in the world. America's tax rates are the worst among our competitors, so this is why jobs are going overseas. And you'll hear members of Congress, you'll hear the President, you'll hear candidates for Congress say, we need to fix this tax code. But they don't do it. House Republicans are going to act to fix this broken tax code. The chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Dave Camp, has held 24 very thoughtful, very solid hearings to find ways to move forward on tax reform. And today, the House has the opportunity to not only lay out principles for a far more simple tax code, far more fair tax code, one that doesn't frighten us to death, and one that doesn't frighten our jobs overseas. More importantly, in this bill is a simple provision that says, Congress, you also have to do your job. It sets up a timetable for the House and Senate next year to have a guaranteed up or down vote on comprehensive tax reform. So no more stalling, no more delaying, no more talking about the need to fix this tax code. In the House today, we will act to guarantee that Congress must take this up. And it's about time, because we are losing jobs. We're dragging our own economy down. We're frightening hardworking taxpayers who are just trying to live by the law, but no one actually understands this tax code. We're determined to act, and when we do act, both today and next year, at fundamental reform that's lower and fairer and simpler, our economy is going to grow. This nation's going to grow. We're going to be back on top of the world when it comes to the best business climate and strongest economy in the world. But today, we first have to act. I strongly support this bill, and I encourage members of this House to do so as well. I yield back.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
I yield myself 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
The gentleman from Texas talks about loopholes. Is the mortgage interest deduction a loophole? Is the charitable contribution deduction a loophole? State and local taxes a loophole? Municipal bonds a loophole? The health care provision a loophole? You keep using that word, I think, demagogically. Demagogically. I now yield 4 minutes to another distinguished member of our committee, Mr. McDermott.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 4 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, the House of Representatives is a wonderful body. It's one of the most amazing places in the whole world. It's where we make decisions for 300 million people. We make them for a lot of other places that we're going to influence around the world. And every once in a while you sort of come here and think, I've seen everything, and then we got one more. Here we are today, the last day of the session, with no debate whatsoever on this bill anywhere. It's just brought out here de novo. I guess it came from God, or from the Speaker's office or someplace. I don't have any idea where it came from. But it seems to me that the House of Representatives is working hard to forget every positive lesson we have learned in the history of governing this country about how to get things, big things done for the American people. Today's bill sets up a process to ram through whatever bill Congressman Levin writes in 2013. Because he'll be chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. He'll sit in a closed room using arbitrary rates with no input and no debate. It'll be a disaster. Oh, did I say Levin? I meant Camp. What am I talking about? It'll be a disaster to have one person sit somewhere in a room and decide what the bill is and bring it out, and this power grab will destroy any attempt that we have or any chance we have of having tax reform. We used to know better. I got here in 1988. That was 2 years after the tax reform of 1986. Now, roll back the clock a little further. 1980, Ronald Reagan won 44-state mandate. He was in power. But there were also strong majorities on the Democratic side in the Congress, just like today. In 1980, just like today, the government was divided. And just like today, both sides wanted to get tax reform done. It wasn't any different in 1980 when President Reagan came in. But today we're debating a power grab bill where it's introduced by one Republican member. Yeah, I guess he didn't have time to get anybody else to sign it before he had to drop it in to bring it out here and discuss it. Scored by one member and given an up or down vote by one member. In every case, unfortunately, the lot falls to Mr. Camp. I don't think Mr. Camp did this. This isn't Mr. Camp. I know him. This isn't the kind of bill he'd sit down and write, because we've seen him when he writes bills. This is written somewhere, and this is how we're going to ram through the House of Representatives, and the point of the sword is Mr. Camp. Now, this appalling breach of procedure is the worst try to get anything done in the House of Representatives. I can't be more clear. Comprehensive tax reform simply will not happen if the process and the bill are autocratic and rabidly partisan. That's the end of it right there. Back in the 1980s, both the Republicans and the Democrats knew that this was true. Tip O'Neill sat up here. He was Democratic Speaker of the House, and Ronald Reagan sat down on the end of Pennsylvania Avenue as the president, and they fiercely disagreed with each other on just about everything when they started. But they knew that they had to find areas of agreement and compromise to get anything done as big as tax reform.
2 minutes to the gentleman.
Thank you. These two were not cut from the same piece of cloth. Tip O'Neill was working-class Irishman. He was passionate about fairness, knew how to get things done, and, well, he liked to have a glass of whiskey now and then. Ronald Reagan believed in a pure sense of individualism, and to Ronald Reagan, tax reform was about lowering taxes. He also liked to tell jokes and occasionally have a glass of whiskey. They both liked to play golf. Then there was Rostenkowski. He was the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. He also played golf, and he liked a glass of whiskey occasionally. They all got to know each other. They pulled other people in. They discussed issues in detail. It was bipartisan. It was not done on one side or the other or simply by one person. Wouldn't, couldn't, never would have happened in those days. They did the people's business that way. Now, lots of voters are angry these days. They don't think Washington works. Well, it doesn't work when you get this kind of legislation brought out here. If people from both sides can sit down. It took Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill and Rostenkowski 6 years, from 1980 to 1986, talking about this issue by the time they finally got it all done. And here we have a bill that could, I guess this could pass by, well, when we get back from Labor Day, I suppose it'll be a couple days, and it'll be through the House. That's not going to happen. You know it's not going to happen. I know it's not going to happen. And the public is angry about this because Washington is not dysfunctional because members of Congress aren't extreme enough. What they're not getting things done because we're not working together. To do tax reform well, to do it right, in fact, to do it at all, we will have to work together. It will take time, it will take debate, it will take thoughtful consideration. There is no other way. This bill we are considering today guarantees failure. It's bad for America. I ask my members to vote no.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
Thanks. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to a distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee and Chairman of the Budget Committee, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Ryan.
Gentleman from Wisconsin is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the Chair for yielding, and I enjoyed listening to the stories of lore from my colleagues who harken back to the good old days when we had smoke-filled backroom deals where laws were written. That's not what we're interested in achieving here. What we want to achieve is a process done in plain view, transparent in the public, and maximizes the opportunity for Congress to actually fix the mess that has become the United States tax code. At the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, I think there's a difference in philosophy here. One side likes to think of the idea of everybody sending their money to Washington, then we go into a back room and we slice up the money and then we send it out to favored groups, favored constituents, people that we want to be as winners versus those who might be losers. We've got to get out of the game of Washington picking winners and losers in the tax code. Because what we do is we stifle that entrepreneur who has an idea, who might not have connections, but can actually have an idea and make a business and grow. We want to remove those barriers to opportunity. We want to remove those barriers to upward mobility. We want a system of entrepreneurs where we have true entrepreneurial capitalism, not this crony capitalism. And, Mr. Speaker, both political parties are guilty of this. Republicans and Democrats, for decades, were party to the process of tucking into the tax code all these various special interest loopholes, which end up rewarding a few while raising tax rates on the many. Well, we've got to get through those days. Because if we haven't noticed, we're in global competition. 97% of the world's consumers live in other countries. If we want to have a good, strong, growing entrepreneurial economy, we need to make things here in America and sell things overseas. But if we keep taxing our successful small businesses, our businesses all around, at much higher tax rates than our foreign competitors tax theirs, they win, we lose. I come from Wisconsin. We're a manufacturing state. That's how we survive. We grow things and we make things in Wisconsin. Our chief competitors right over Lake Superior are the Canadians. Canada just lowered their tax rate to all of their businesses to 15% last January. Well, the substitute that the gentleman brought to the floor, the substitute the President's asking for, will bring the effective top tax rate to those most successful small businesses in Wisconsin to as high as 44.8%. Mr. Speaker, how on earth are our businesses, our manufacturers, our successful small businesses going to compete when we're taxing them at a federal level almost as high as 45% and our competitors are at 25 or 15 or lower? We won't. That's why we want to reform the tax system. And the different philosophy is basically this. I could ask for an additional minute.
Additional minute.
It's the difference in philosophy is this. Some here like the idea of bringing more money out of people's paychecks, more money out of our successful small businesses, and then parceling it out in favors. We prefer the opposite. Let people, let families, let businesses keep their money in the first place so they can decide what they want to do with it. By having high tax rates with lots of loopholes, all we end up doing is we say you can have some of your money back if you do what we approve of in Washington. Even with the best of intentions behind such ideas, it gets corrupt. The powerful and the connected are the ones who call the shots. And so, yes, we need to clear the brush out. And yes, there are popular provisions in the tax code, and that is why we want to have a process in front to debate those things. There will be fiscal space left for things like charities and such the like. Let's have a clear, in-public, not backroom process where we debate just how best to go forward. And what we want is a clean up and down vote so that we can get this country going again, we can get this economy back on track, and we can look at our children and know that we left them better off. With that, I yield.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
I yield myself 15 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
The Republican bill indeed picks winners and losers. The winners are the very wealthy. The losers are the middle-class Americans of this country. I now, with pleasure, yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Frank.
Gentleman from Massachusetts, recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, first I note that the chairman of the Budget Committee said that we want to get this out of the back rooms. And then I reread the bill. And the bill says one person, the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, will draft this bill, certify it, and present it to the Congress with very limited time to debate. So it is true. They do want to replace the back room, but with a telephone booth. Now that's hard to do because there aren't that many phone booths left. But there will apparently be one in which the chairman of Ways and Means will single-handedly draft this bill without a great deal of input. And what is it they're going to draft? What we're told is it will include reductions in the rates paid by the wealthiest, and it alludes in the most, not even close to specific terms, to getting rid of some loopholes. But we don't know what those are. This great courageous effort to deal with the special interests begins by ignoring it, by promising goodies to the wealthiest people, will reduce your taxes, and will somehow make it up in a vague way with how they don't know because they don't want to say. I mean, procedurally and substantively, the bill's a disaster. That's the bad news. The good news is that no one thinks it is a serious legislative effort. This is one more bumper sticker from the gang that cannot legislate. We are here today with the Republican leadership having backed down on passing a bill that the Agriculture Committee came forward with. Now, it's popular on the Republican side to talk about the Senate. Oh, the Democrats run the Senate, and they're choking everything off. Exactly the opposite is the case. The Senate passed a transportation bill. The House couldn't. The House couldn't even take one up because there is such division within the Republican Party. So here, in a procedural maneuver that smacks of a very undemocratic way, they sneaked into conference. A conference report came with the Senate transportation bill, the only bill that passed either house, and then members obediently passed a omnibus bill, including a transportation bill that this House never got to concede. But even that looks good compared to postal issues. The Postal Service is now in default. Yeah, it is default. It's the fault of the Republicans, who are, again, so ideologically driven, so unable to deal with the basics of government because of their dominance by a faction that does not understand the role of our coming together to do things in a society. And the Post Office, that's a pretty controversial one. That radical George Washington set it up. And it's a great unifier in this country. And it continues to be. One of the things we do here, people scoff at it, we name post offices, but those are great symbols of the community. And I got to say, with all of the new communications, no one's ever asked me to name an iPod after anybody. We use the post offices. But what happened? The Senate passed a postal bill. This House can't take one up once again because this Republican Party is so divided between their extremist wing and other people that, so we got transportation. We have postal. They can't do a postal bill, and the Postal Service is now in default. Well, we debate this bill that no one takes seriously, that the chairman of Ways and Means will single-handedly put on his cape and fly down here with this bill that will help the rich, and it'll do some unmentioned things regarding popular tax breaks because they don't want to mention them. And then we have the agriculture bill. So on the fundamental functions of government, an agriculture bill, a transportation bill, a postal bill, the party that couldn't legislate didn't legislate. Again, because they cannot get people on their own side to understand what we need in this society. We need a postal service. We need transportation. We need an agriculture bill, although I just see one different than the one the committee put out. But we don't even get a chance to vote on them. Instead, we get a bumper sticker. Oh, we're going to cut taxes for the wealthy. And I did notice, too, they say they're going to get the taxes, it should be 18 or 19% of the GDP. We have Mr. Romney committing that we will spend 4% of the GDP on the military, whether that's what's needed or not, whether we go to more wars or not. So look at what's left. Take what they want to put in taxes, take what Romney wants to commit to the military, and there's no room for anything else. There's not much room for a good Medicare program. Social Security gets squeezed. The environment, clean water, transportation. That's why they can't legislate, because they're locked into an illogical mindset that reduces, they say, the revenues and increases the military beyond what is needed and leaves us unable to do those things which a civilized society wants to come together to do. So, yeah, the bad news is that this is a crazy bill. But the good news is that after today's bumper sticker waving, no one will pay attention to it.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Texas, Mr. Henserling.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Speaker, every single day we see more proof of the President's failed economic policies. We just have heard that last quarter's GDP was revised down. It's probably 2/3 of what it ought to be. 41 straight months of 8% plus unemployment. Millions can't find jobs. Millions more only can find part-time work. Real disposable income of working families down under this President's failed policies. And because his policies have failed, he resorts to the politics of diversion, division, and envy. Change the subject. Let's talk about taxes. Let's divide Americans into smaller groups and make them envious of each other. So the President comes and says, let's increase taxes. Let's increase taxes on 1 million small businesses. Fact. Ernst & Young has said this will cost our economy 700,000 jobs. Fact. Small businesses now say for the first time in almost 4 years, the greatest threat is not lack of sales, it's taxes. And that's why House Republicans voted yesterday to stop the tax increases. Stop the tax increases. Today, we take the next step. And that is to create a process for a fairer, flatter, simpler, and more competitive tax code. One that will assure that the family budget doesn't go broke paying for the federal budget. One that ensures that the success of working families depends on how hard they work in their hometowns and not the size of their tax loopholes in Washington, D.C. Now, my friends from the other side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, they have great theories that we're going to tax our way into economic growth. If only we will tax small businesses more, that somehow they'll create more jobs. Beatings will continue until morale improves, is their theory. Well, we have history. We have history. Go to the Coolidge administration, the Kennedy administration, the Reagan administration, the Bush administration. Every time we have lowered marginal rates, every time that we have simplified the tax code, not only have we ignited economic growth, but we've actually received more tax revenues. And yet my friends from the other side of the aisle and the President, they want to defend the status quo only more so. And now I wake up this morning to discover that as they defend the global system, that even our Olympians are going to be taxed on their Olympic medals. So we've had a president who told every small businessman in America, every small businesswoman, you didn't build that. By defending this global system, they now tell our Olympians, you didn't win that. That belongs to the Internal Revenue System. This is what it is about today. Less taxes and more jobs, more taxes, fewer jobs. Thank you.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Levin.
Oh, well. I now yield 4 minutes to the distinguished member of our committee, Mr. Thompson of California.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I rise in opposition to this bill. It's interesting. Today is the one-year anniversary of the enactment of the Budget Control Act. That came about and left us with this impending sequestration. So let's remember why we passed the Budget Control Act. We passed it because it was a compromise reached in order to raise the debt ceiling, which the House majority was refusing to allow to be raised. They were refusing to raise the debt ceiling because they said that they were concerned and they cared about our nation's debt. But just yesterday, that same House majority passed a bill that will add over $400 billion to our national debt in just 1 year. A bill that continues tax cuts that added $3 trillion to our debt over the last decade, and that history has shown didn't help economic growth. Now we have this bill on the floor to mandate strict parameters of tax reform. I want to do tax reform, Mr. Speaker. There isn't any one of us who doesn't want to do tax reform, but this is the wrong way to go about it. Locking in certain rates and certain rules is not how tax reform is done and can lead to very serious unintended consequences, like exploding our national debt. Yesterday, the Tax Policy Center released a review of Mitt Romney's tax plan, which is not dissimilar to the principles in this underlying bill. The study found, and I quote, "It is not mathematically possible to design a revenue-neutral plan that preserves current incentives for savings and investment and that does not result in a net tax cut for the highest income taxpayers and a net tax increase for lower and middle income taxpayers," end quote. The Joint Economic Committee confirmed today that the plan in this bill would mean that people who make under $200,000 a year would see their taxes raised, in this case by about $4,500, while millionaires would see tax breaks of over, hold on to your hat, $300,000. And there's nothing in this bill that says that tax reform will not increase our debt. We should do tax reform, and we should do it in a deliberative, thoughtful way, rather than by passing bills saying that we should do tax reform. For this reason, I strongly urge everyone to vote no on this piece of legislation. Now, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Camp.
Yeah, I would just yield myself 15 seconds and say that the plan the gentleman refers to is a made-up plan. What we're looking at is the model set up in the Bowles-Simpson Commission, which has been endorsed in a bipartisan way, that will be an open process that will allow amendments so we can debate these ideas in that process, not this made-up bill that they went and are discussing on the floor today. So at this time, I yield 3 minutes to the distinguished chairman of the Health Subcommittee, the gentleman from California, Mr. Herger.
The gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Yesterday, this House voted to stop the job-destroying tax hike that threatens to hit every American taxpayer at midnight on December 31st. Today, we have an opportunity to build on that. We have an opportunity not only to do the right thing for jobs and job creators in the short term, but to begin building the foundation for a more stable and prosperous economy in the future. Few would argue that our current tax code is ideal. It's far too complicated, with taxpayers spending over $160 billion each year just to figure out what they owe. Even the commissioner of the IRS has acknowledged that he hires a professional tax preparer to do his own taxes. It's often unfair, with some taxpayers enjoying the benefits of narrow tax breaks that are not available to others. It has increasingly become a patchwork of temporary rules that fail to provide America's small businesses and job creators with the certainty they need to plan for the future. And many of its features actually penalize the work, investment, and savings that are necessary to economic growth. Furthermore, an outdated international tax system combined with the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world places American companies at a disadvantage against their competitors based in Europe and China. The bill before us lays out a pathway to a simpler, fairer, and more pro-growth tax code. With the right kind of tax reform, our tax code can become a means to support job creation rather than an obstacle standing in the way. In fact, it has been estimated that the tax reform would free up American businesses to create as many as 1 million new jobs in the first year alone. I want to commend Chairman Camp for his outstanding leadership on this issue and for making it clear that House Republicans are serious about tax reform. Today's vote will send a strong message that tax reform is moving forward. I urge all members to vote yes.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan reserves the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
I now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from New York, a veteran of negotiations on taxes and tax reform, Mr. Rangel.
Gentleman from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
I'd like to have unanimous consent to revise and extend.
Without objection, so ordered.
First, let me thank Ranking Member Levin for giving me this opportunity, and thanking the chairman for bringing up the idea that this Congress is concerned about taxes. I say that because some of us will go home and our friends and constituents would say, well, how long have you got to be home? And I guess we have to say for close to a month. I say, so you mean that Thursday today was the last day for over a month? Yes. Well, what were you doing? I said, we were doing taxes. Oh, what are you doing about taxes? Were you talking about reforming it? I would say, I heard the word reform being used, but no, we're being asked by the Republican majority to vote for a pathway to reform. Well, I wish I had some of the Republican statement on this floor stapled to my press release so I can explain what the heck is a pathway to reform. Since 1986, what we had thought reform was to cut out from that tax code obscene provisions that some shouldn't have been in there, but certainly there's no reason for them to be in there now, to save trillions of dollars, and to take that savings by reducing the high rate that we pay corporations, and so that we can be competitive in the international market. But someone outside of the Congress said that to close these loopholes and to raise revenue is the wrong thing to do. So I don't know where this wiggly path is to reform, but I know one thing, we're not going to be dealing with this path in August or September, and it's hard for me to believe that we're going to do it this year. So what the heck we need a path for when the American people are jobless and looking for a way to some type of relief, and the only thing they believe is that somewhere along the line the Republicans want to get rid of Obama, and they don't care how they get rid of him. They don't care whether it's jobs, education, science, air pollution. Don't be cooperative and be involved with anything that's good for the country, the Congress, as long as the President gets a chance to sign it for the United States of America. Now, how in the heck we can be on a path of reform when basically what we're talking about is that tax reductions that were supposed to be temporary expire at the end of this year? What reform is there for those people who see a dramatic increase in their taxes that liberals and conservatives say we don't want that to happen? Well, if we don't want that to happen, why don't we do something about it today so that they and businesses would know what tomorrow is going to look like beyond today, which for all practical purposes ends our legislative session? It's my understanding that 98% of the people will get dramatic increases under this pathway, this roadway. Their taxes will go up. Now, we have to admit there's some wealthy people that belong to the less than 2%. And it's abundantly clear that if the reason why they have to hold hostage to 98% is because they have created all of the jobs, well, they certainly haven't proved it in the past. They're not proving it now. And very few of them hold small businesses so that they'll be adversely affected. But I would assume that that is controversial to 2%. I would assume this is what we should fight about. But I hate to be a Republican that has to go back home to my district and explain that the reason 98% of hard-working taxpayers are going to get an increase in their taxes is because we felt so strongly about the top wealthiest people that we said, the heck with them. We're not giving that up until we make certain that you are protected. Wow. Sometimes the party asks too much of its members. And I really hope that somewhere along the line that the hatred and animosity for this president at least will be reduced to the voting booths and not to the country. Someone once said that the goal of the Republican Party is to get rid of Obama and to make him a first-term president.
Time has expired.
Seconds, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman's time has expired.
I yield an additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized for 30 seconds.
So to get rid of Obama. Well, I understood that. I started saying these things about Nixon and Bush and all of those things. But I never dreamed that it meant having the country to go down with the captain. I never dreamed that it meant that you don't let the president increase the debt ceiling. I never dreamed that it included millions of jobs and tax relief for people, as it seems that they mean.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you for the opportunity. I hope things change in September.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Michigan reserves the balance of his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield 3 minutes to a distinguished member of the Ways and Means Committee, the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Roscom.
Gentleman from Illinois is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the gentleman for yielding. You know, I was listening to the gentleman from New York, and I sincerely appreciate his warm, heartfelt advice for the Republican Party. I'm amazed at the characterization of opposition to a president's policies as somehow as opposition to the country. I fundamentally reject that. I think that's a gross characterization, and I think on behalf of everybody on the GOP side, that is an absurd argument. Now, that being said, I want to pick up on a thread and a subtext of what we heard from our friends on the other side of the aisle, and it's a very interesting thing. I'm not being sarcastic. It is a very hopeful thing. It's this, Mr. Speaker. Did you notice today that there is nobody who is defending the status quo of our current tax code? Nobody. We will not hear any voice from our friends on the other side defending the current tax code. We will hear no voice today on this side. I haven't listened to our friends on the other side of the dome, but I'm hunching that there's nobody on the other side among all those members who are defending the status quo. And so what does that mean for us today? That means that there's an unbelievable opportunity. There's an opportunity that is born of recognition of a failed system. Some characterize it as crony capitalism. That is, if you're connected, if you're somebody of means, if you're able to come into this town and with a sharp elbow insert something into the tax code and manipulate it, then you get an economic win at the expense of everybody else. The gentleman from New York asked a rhetorical question a couple of minutes ago, and I jotted it down. He said, what do we need a path for? We need a path to get out of this. That's what we need a path for. And with all due respect to the President is not leading on a pathway that shows us how to get out of this. So what do you have the chairman of the committee, what do you have the GOP in the House doing right now? They're saying, look, Let's not defend the status quo. Let's instead completely transform this debate, and let's focus in on one word, and that is the word of competitiveness. How do we create in this country the most competitive tax jurisdiction in the world? Could you imagine how great it could be? Could you imagine what it would be like if our tax code were a foundation upon which what could happen? You could have entrepreneurs who are willing to take risk because there is a possibility of reward in the future. Right now, they're being told from this town that if you built it, you didn't really build it, and we don't want to have you take credit for it. That's ridiculous. That's absurd. That's a worldview that we should shun and reject and move away from. We need to pass this. We need to pass this urgently, and I urge an aye vote, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Michigan reserves the balance of his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Michigan rise?
I now yield 4 minutes to another distinguished member of our committee. Just to